Hello, everyone at Tokyo Union Church. My name is Casey Choi, and I'm a professor here at Princeton Theological Seminary in the great state of New Jersey in the United States. And I teach Asian American theology and Christian ethics. I first off want to thank Pastor Lydia and Pastor Hector for inviting me to join you and respond to a handful of questions on AI and religion. I found these questions rather challenging. I actually found them really, really hard. So I hope you find my responses somewhat interesting and at the very least, a decent starting point for further conversation at your church. So I'm just going to go through these questions in the order that they were listed for me, that they were presented for me, and share the reflections that emerged as I was thinking through these questions. So the first question, what makes AI fundamentally different from previous communication technologies? There are many differences from previous communication technologies, but I think one key feature that is, of course, on the minds of so many is the word generative. There are different ways of describing AI, machine learning, et cetera, but I think generative AI is one description that is super helpful because it suggests that AI has the capacity to develop answers or responses, that is, synthesize data, materials, whatever inputs it's receiving in such a way to narrate a response rather than simply pointing to areas of the web where we might find a response. So the generative aspect of AI is one feature that makes it different or unique since it gives off the sense that it can think and reflect and offer sage advice. And on the issue of AI and thinking, AI and thought, I have a couple more things to say about that, but I'll save that, share that later. But for now, let me just stop here and move on to the next question. The second question, could AI democratize access to knowledge even further than the internet? Yes, in theory, but theory is, of course, not reality. The reality is more potentially, in my view, anti-democratic. In reality, it has the potential to make us less self-governing in the sense that we end up becoming overly dependent on the generative intelligence of AI. So it spews out answers for us, and then we take whatever it tells us as truth, or as some people already do, as gospel. But there is a more problematic way, I think, that AI is making us less self-governing, and that is the way AI is restricting the range of benefit. And this issue of AI and the restriction of the range of benefit, I think this is where some of the deep moral or ethical issues with AI reside. And it's something that Pope Leo, in his recent social encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, has been trying to call attention to. Actually, this is something that the larger tradition of Catholic social teaching has been raising this issue for quite some time. And so the question really here is who is actually benefiting from AI? One could make a case that the everyday person who is using it is gaining some benefit, some real benefit, more knowledge, more answers, more work efficiencies, even in our personal schedules, freeing up time for us to do the kind of things that we want to do. But that benefit, in some real sense, pales in comparison to the benefit that is being received or gained by those who are working in tech and in finance, who are controlling these AI technologies and these companies. So, in that respect, another way of asking the question of benefit is really to ask the question of who is really in control. And so, to kind of parse this question out a little bit more, let's come back to Pope Leo and to Catholic social teaching more generally. And consider the kind of thought experiment that Pope Leo and Catholic social teaching want us to engage in. And this thought experiment goes something like this. What if we thought about AI from the perspective of the poor? That is, in Catholic social teaching, there is this distinction between, on the one hand, affirming the importance of social justice, and on the other hand, being able to assess whether social justice is a reality. That is, how would we know if social justice is being achieved? Well, Catholic social teaching's answer has been by seeing how it affects the poor. So it will ask the following kinds of questions, questions that I think are really important for us to reflect on. Are the policies or the technologies that are being developed in society, are these things making people who are poor poorer, or are they making people less poor? I think this is an interesting question to ask with respect to AI. Are the developments in AI making the poor more poor and the rich even more rich? These are questions I invite you to think about. All right, next question. What risks arise when machines participate in producing religious ideas? This is a really interesting question, and I really had to think about this one for a while. Um, but I think we need to start off by thinking about what AI does. That is, what AI does is take what is out there, the stuff that's already existing, and puts them together. Right? This is something that I mentioned earlier. And sometimes it puts together information that's out on the web or whatever whatever it's taking in. It puts this information together in rather conventional ways. But in other ways, it actually might lead to creative outputs. It actually might put together the information that's out there in novel combinations or novel ways. So, in that respect, it might actually provide new ways of thinking about God. Let me just throw that out there as a possibility. I don't think that's an impossibility. I think that's a real possibility that it could actually put together the knowledge that we have, the theological ideas that we have, and put them together in ways that might help us to actually think about God in ways that we have not before. But I think the bigger risk, but I don't think that that's the problem. Actually, I think the bigger problem or the bigger risk is on our side of the equation, which is to say, what will we end up doing with whatever stuff AI comes up with? Will we simply accept it as truth or as gospel? Or will it serve as a prompt to get us to keep thinking and reflecting? So I actually think this is the bigger challenge with respect to AI, whether it's AI in religion or AI and whatever. It's actually a problem with the internet more generally, which is that we have tended to take whatever is out there as true, and we have become less capable of critical thought. The next question, what is the difference between intelligence and wisdom in matters of faith? Let me start by suggesting that what AI does is not all that different from what we might call human intelligence. AI thinks in a way that humans think. So let me start with that proposition. And what I mean by that is that there's been a lot of discussion in the past few decades in theology and philosophy about whether thought can emerge within our own selves, or whether our thinking is always a dialogical phenomenon, which is to say something that emerges within community, with interaction with others. So the famous Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor is well known for saying that when we talk about the self, we need to talk about the sources of the self. The self does not simply exist as itself, but it exists by virtue of the various things outside of itself that informs it, that makes up the self, that makes up its individuality. So in this sense, there is no genuine individuality. And that is to say, our individuality is always somehow a compilation of the various environmental influences that are out there. In some ways, this is what AI is doing when it generates a thought. It is not doing it solely through its own self, but rather it's coming up with a thought by learning and mining from various sources that are out there on the web or whatever data sets that we are inputting. So in that respect, I don't think AI is thinking in a way that is all that different from the way that human persons think. Now, the main difference, however, is perhaps the way that we also think and know through our bodies. That is, we have sense experiences. And it's at this point, I think that AI thinking and human thinking is really quite different. That is to say, generative AI is bodiless. And so it doesn't have a body, in other words. And so AI can't necessarily feel the world, so to speak. They can't experience the world in the same way that we can experience the world. So when we talk about experience or having experience and how experiences are important to knowing, what we mean by that in part is that we have bodies, that we are having a bodily experience, a sense experience, that we have this capacity for a bodily experience, for sense experience. Jonathan Edwards, who is a theologian, a famous 18th century Reformed theologian. A lot of my research is in Jonathan Edwards's theology. So Jonathan Edwards makes this distinction between notional and sense knowledge, between notional knowledge and sense knowledge. So to kind of explain this, let's think about pizza and eating pizza. So you can have a thought about eating pizza. You can have an idea about what eating a pizza is like, and we can call this notional knowledge. But knowing a pizza as you eat it is quite a different matter. It's a very different experience, right? Knowing what a pizza is as you eat the pizza is very different from simply having a thought or an idea about that pizza. And Jonathan Edwards refers to this kind of knowing, knowing something as you are doing it, as you are experiencing it, a function of what he calls sense knowledge. So AI can produce notional knowledge. Um, it can produce an idea about something. But we as humans, we have notional knowledge, but we also have something more. That is to say, we have the capacity for sense knowledge. So the really interesting question for me is what happens when AI is eventually given a body, an artificial body? So I think that's an interesting question to think about. I don't actually think it's too crazy of an idea to ponder. But until then, AI, the ideas, the knowledge that it produces is only a notional of the notional variety. Because AI doesn't have a body, it can't produce sense knowledge. But what I think is an unsettling question to think about is at some point, I think that AI can be given a body, a synthetic body. I think advances are being made in this direction. And once AI is given a body, even a synthetic body, can it also have something more than notional knowledge? Can it have sense knowledge like human persons can have? That's super interesting to think about, I think. Maybe really frightening, but interesting at the very least. All right. Next question. What aspects of religious life and human community cannot be replaced by machines? Again, I think this question needs to be discussed in relation to something that makes humans unique compared to machines, compared to AI, which is that we have bodies and AI doesn't have a body. We can spend a whole lot of time thinking about what it means to have a body. We can spend a lifetime thinking about it, actually. But just for the sake of provoking some reflection, let me quickly share with you a course that I teach here at Princeton Seminary at our farminary. So here at Princeton Seminary, we have a farm, and we have this cute word for it, the farminary. And I'm sure Pastor Lydia can tell you a lot more about it. But for now, let me just share with you a little bit about a course that I teach at the Farminary, a theology and ethics of food course, where each week on the Farminary, when I teach this class, as part of our class time, we harvest vegetables grown at the farm, and we cook together and eat together as a way of thinking about what it means to be in community. In other words, what it means to be enfleshed, embodied creatures. There's a level of mutuality and interrelatedness that emerges from this experience of cooking and eating together out on the farm that is, I will have to just say out loud, just really hard to reproduce, right? Um, uh, but the experience of the mutuality and the interrelatedness that emerges from this experience of cooking and eating together out on the farm. I think those experiences really, at least for me, have underscored the fact that we are embodied creatures meant for embodied life together. That is to say, it's only possible if we take our embodiedness very seriously. Can we achieve that kind of embodied life together with AI, which lacks a bodily reality? Again, another interesting question, I think, for us to ponder together. All right, last question. Thoughts on this notion? AI might be, um, um, what are my thoughts on this question? AI might be the first time our conversation includes something that isn't human. All right. Well, I think, given everything that I've said so far, you may have gotten the impression that I think AI is human to a degree, in that it can generate thought in the way that humans can, at least at the notional level. And if you've gotten this impression, that's the right impression. I do think that AI is 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 human to a degree, but again, only to the degree that it can produce thought at the notional level. Um, so, in this respect, AI is human to a degree, but it's not fully human in the sense that it lacks the kind of embodied architecture that is also pivotal to the way that humans think. We think notionally and we also think through the senses, if you will. But let me finish up here with just a real quick point by returning to something that I raised earlier regarding who is actually in control of AI. More specifically, if you can at least agree with me that AI is human to a degree, the interesting question that emerges is whose vision of humanity does AI represent? Again, going back to the question of who benefits the most from the development of AI, is it us, the everyday person, or tech and finance titans? What we should really be worried about, just as Pope Leo is worried about, is whether AI represents a vision of humanity that is being championed by tech oligarchs such as Thiel, Altman, or Musk, or whether AI is pushing a vision of humanity that is genuinely humane. So long as we're having conversations with AI controlled by tech titans, then we might be having conversations with an idolatrous vision of humanity. So let me say that again. So long as we're having conversations with AI controlled by tech titans, then we might be having conversations with an idolatrous vision of humanity. Another really, really challenging question to reflect on, I think. All right, so that's it for me. I think I've probably answered your questions with more questions to ponder, but that's the, I think, nature of AI and religion. And one day I would love to hear how your conversations are going on this topic. Thank you very much for listening to me, and hope to one day meet all of you. And God bless you. Take care. Bye bye.